in the restoration period, where the Judah has come out of Babylonian captivity, back down into Jerusalem, and restoring the city of Jerusalem again. Zerubbabel was the first man that came down, and what was it that he restored? The temple. Then Ezra came, and he restored the law. And then Nehemiah came, and he restored the walls. That's right. So now then, in the first 7 chapters, we have Nehemiah, who has restored those walls, and we've been talking about some of the opposition that he met, and making application to our situation today as we try to restore New Testament Christianity. That he got a lot of opposition, we get a lot of opposition, we can see how he handled it, and we can handle it the same way. Now as we start in chapter 8, that opposition, or that building of the walls, has now been done. Now, the opposition is not over. We'll be running across that again tonight, but the building of the walls is done. They haven't dedicated them yet, but they're getting ready to dedicate them a little bit later. But now we got the walls up, and so before he dedicates the wall, though, they do an interesting thing. They're going to gather all of the Jews together, and they're going to read the Scriptures to them. Now, who do you suppose will be doing the reading? Ezra. Ezra is going to be the one. He's the he is a priest, and so he's the one who is restoring or working on that law and getting the law in the right way. So now he's going to be reading this. Why don't they just read their own copies at home? All right. They've been over in Babylonian captivity. They haven't had their Scriptures over there. They come back over into Jerusalem, and over here again, they don't have the Scriptures. Now, how many years were they in captivity? 70 years were in captivity. Stop to think, if we tonight, if we hadn't had the Scriptures for 70 years, and we had had a couple of prophets that had come through, a couple of preachers, and they came through, and every once in a while we got to hear them, and they would get up and preach. But in 70 years, we haven't had the Scriptures. Now, what does that mean about your mom and dad and the Scriptures? Here's a whole generation of people that hasn't had them. So they're not sure what they say. So Ezra now is going to read them. So he's going to gather it together and kind of put the situation in its context and think about it, because he's going to say they got everybody together, men and women, everyone who could understand. If you could understand, you were to be there to hear the reading. The synagogues were developed a little bit later on, in between the Testaments. Right. No, they had kept the basis, the foundation of there is one God. There is one God, and we're going to serve Him. In fact, they went in idolaters, and they came out how? With all those idols washed away, they came out believing in the one God. Now, they came out with the very basis. Abraham is our father. We've got these, David and so forth, all these men. That the history is just the stories about them. We are God's chosen people. Jerusalem is God's chosen city. The temple is God's chosen place. They came out with just the basics, but they didn't have the Scriptures. Now then, they're getting ready to read them. And so I'm going to take a little time here in chapter 8, and we're just going to read chapter 8 and see now the impression it made upon them. So try to think, this is different than if we just had a Scripture reading here. And by the way, they read the Scriptures for a half a day. A half a day. From sun up to sundown. So they read the Scriptures for 6 hours. And then they took a break. And then after that, then days after that, they would read it like that. So they were there and they were hungry for the Scriptures. Now, let's start out and let's read here in verse 1. And all the people gathered themselves together as one man into the broad place, and that was before the water gate. That would mean in a great big, what we would say parking lot, a great big place where there wasn't any buildings there, so they could all get in there. That was before the water gate. And they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of Moses, which Jehovah had commanded to Israel. And Ezra the priest brought the law before the assembly, both men and women, and all that could hear with understanding upon the first day of the 7th month. So now then they're in there ready to go. And he read therein before the broad place, that was before the water gate, from early morning until midday, in the presence of the men and the women and those that could understand, and the ears of all the people were attentive unto the book of the law. Now, if we had a 6-hour Bible reading Saturday morning, how many of you would be able to be attentive for 6 hours? Can you imagine that? And you'd say, oh my, we couldn't do that. But that's the reason I want you to put yourself in their shoes. They are hearing things here for the first time. And they're going to hear things that they should be doing that they've never heard about before. Right? And here it is in the law, and they're going, wow. Now, I don't suppose it'd be possible for us to put ourselves in their shoes and for me to tell you, now Saturday morning, I'm going to read you the Bible, the new law, and there's going to be a 6-hour reading, and during this 6 hours, you're going to learn many things that you don't know anything about. You're going to learn a lot of things that you should have been doing for these many years, but you didn't even know you should have been doing them. Yeah, but the mothers and fathers evidently have forgotten a lot of this stuff. See, in 70 years, there's a lot of decay that is in there. So they're going to hear some things that they didn't know. And they're going to jump right in and start doing them, is what they're going to do. So, it's a very interesting thing. Now, verse 4. And Ezra the scribe stood upon a pulpit of wood. So they made a big high platform for him to stand upon, which they had made for the purpose, and beside him stood, I'm not going to read the names of these guys here, except down in verse 4, at the very, down at the end, next to the last, who's the guy down there that we have talked about before? There's Zechariah, so he's still alive. All right, verse 5. And Ezra opened the book in the sight of all the people, for he was above all the people. And when he opened it, all the people stood up. And Ezra blessed Jehovah, the great God, and all the people answered, Amen, Amen, with the lifting up of their hands. And they bowed their heads and worshiped Jehovah with their faces to the ground. Okay, also, there's a group of men that were there. They caused the people to understand the law, and the people stood in their place. So now, these other guys here, as Ezra read, then these men would make the people understand the law. What would that mean? What's that? They were explaining it. They were making them understand it. See, here's what this means. Here's what this means. So they were explaining it, teaching them as the reading was going on. All right, in verse 8, and they read in the book, in the law of God distinctly. So they read it so it was very clear for them to hear, and they gave the sense. That is, they explained it as they were reading it. Here's what he says, here's what it means, so that they understood the reading. So I guess we could say this is probably the biggest Bible class that was ever held, couldn't we? That's really what it is, yes. No, it was the same one. By translating, it would mean, it would mean interpreting, and not what we would think of translating there. Now, I want to make a point right here which has no relevance to these guys, but it does to you and me. And today, as you're talking to somebody, if you ever talk to a Seventh-day Adventist, Seventh-day Adventists will tell you that the old law is not done away. And we must keep the Sabbath day. And they're very, very convinced of this, that the old law is not done away. Now, you go over to the New Testament, and do the Adventists believe in the New Testament? Yeah, they believe in the New Testament. Now, you go over to the New Testament, and the New Testament just plainly says that it has been done away. See, Ephesians 2:14, Colossians 2:14, 2 Corinthians 3, and so forth, just plainly says it has been done away. But guess what they say when it says that the law has been done away? Okay, it was just part of it, but how do they do it? You can't, there has to be some logic. Well, here's the logic. Let me give you the logic. The logic is this, that when God took Moses up on Mount Sinai and gave him the Ten Commandments, that was the law of God. God wrote it with his finger, and that was the law of God. Then Moses brought the Ten Commandments down, gave them to the people, and then Moses delivered a lot of other commandments, and those are the law of Moses. So there is a difference between the law of Moses and the law of God. The law of God is the Ten Commandments. The law of Moses are all the other commandments about offering animal sacrifices and all these other things that you do. Now, everybody see what we're saying here? Uh-huh. We're not to that point. Do you see the argument that they give? See, I want you to see what they do. So as you're talking with them, see, you'll get hit with this, and you'll say, how am I going to answer this? See? So in the New Testament, where it says the law has been done away, it's talking about the law of Moses and not the law of God. Now, what's the one commandment that they want to keep? The Sabbath. Where is the Sabbath given? In the Ten Commandments. It's in the fourth commandment. So we got to keep the law of God and do away with the law of Moses. You understand what I'm saying? Do you see the argument? I want you to see it. In other words, it's a logical argument. It's an argument that you look at and you say, huh. Now, it's up to you to prove that that's wrong. See, that's what they're going to give you. It's up to you now to prove that it's wrong. Now, you might say, well, you prove that it's right. Well, I'm telling you, this is my proof. See, God gave the Ten Commandments. That's the law of God. Then Moses gave the other commandments. That's the law of Moses. Okay, right here is an illustration of this. And this is one of those things where you say, God must have known, God must have looked forward and have seen every false doctrine that will ever come up, and he put the answer in there somewhere, because you always find it in here. Let's go back up here and let's read. Now, let's start in verse 1. All the people gathered themselves together as one man in the broad places, and they were before the water gate, and they spake unto Ezra the scribe to bring the book of the law of what? The law of Moses. All right, now he's going to read out of that law of Moses. Down in verse 5, Ezra opened the book, and he read. Then let's get down to verse 8. And they read in the book, in the law of God, distinctly. The same book they were reading from is called the law of Moses and the law of God. Do you see? And so that's all that I want to point out to you in here. Yeah. That's it. No. No. Well, he didn't worship on the Sabbath. He went into Sabbath and he preached to people and told them they were wrong. Yeah, but there's a whole lot of difference. There's a whole lot of difference if I go out somewhere and I'm converted to a Tuesday worshiper. I got a new religion. So Sunday I come back here and ask you if I might preach again. Well, you'll say, well, sure, Lowell, we'd be glad to have you. All right, I get up, and now I'm going to tell you that what you're doing is wrong. Isn't that what Paul told them in every synagogue? He got stoned, got run out, and the law of Moses and all that is not there, and so he got run out. Then where would he go the next Sabbath? To another synagogue. And then he'd get kicked out of that, see? And so I go around every Sunday. See, I'd preach here, and then I'd go over to Silver Lake next Sunday, and then I'd go up Smoky Point, and I'd go down to Kirkland, and I'd go down to Renton. So I'm in there every Sunday, but I'm not worshiping. See, I'm in there preaching to the people that will hear me because we worship on Sunday. And so we'll not get into the other arguments. There's a lot of arguments that you can give. I just want you to see this right here as we're going through. Our class tonight is not on the Adventist, but it's this. Mark this so that you'll know it. Yeah, Cal? Oh, okay. All right. So now then, they come down here, and Nehemiah, who was the governor then, he talks with the people here and said, the Levites that taught the people say unto the people, this day is holy unto Jehovah your God. Mourn not nor weep. For all the people wept when they heard the words of the law. So they were really touched. First time they've ever heard it. And they're going to hear things that they didn't know was there. So they're very sorrowful. They're in sin. And they're weeping. So he says, this is a joyful day. Don't weep. He said, now in verse 10, then he said unto them, go your way. Eat the fat and drink the sweet. And send portions unto him for whom nothing is prepared. Have a happy day. Go eat your fat and drink your sweet. Does that mean sugar? They didn't have sugar then. It had not been found as of yet. But they would have other things, herbs and honey and such as this. Why does it say go eat the fat? If I told you I want to take you out to a dinner tomorrow night, and I want to take you to the best dinner you've ever had, and this is really a great thing. I mean, I want it to be the most enjoyable dinner you've ever had. I want to take you over here where they fix the best fats you've ever seen. You'd laugh at me. Well, that's what this is. The fat was a very delicious part of the animal that's there. If we weren't so prejudiced, we could learn that. I remember that my granddad, I didn't eat any fat, you know. And so when I'd eat with him, he'd say, I'll trade you my lean for your fat. So I'd cut the fat off the pork and give it to him, and he'd cut the lean off and give me the lean, and he'd eat the fat. I thought he was crazy. Now I find out he's the only one smart one there. So go and in other words, enjoy yourself. This is a great day. Send presents to people that don't have anything. Everybody be happy today. Down in verse 12. And all the people went their way to eat and drink and send portions and make great myrrh because they had understood the words that were declared unto them. So now for the first time, this generation of people understand what God wants them to do. So they are happy. He said, now go get olive branches and go get these things here, and we're now going to make booths. So, in verse 14, they found written in the law how that Jehovah had commanded Moses to have this Feast of Booths. Now, they had this Feast of Booths, and the Feast of Booths was every year they were to go out and gather limbs, brush, and make a camp. Make a temporary encampment. It's just like if we were lost out in the wilderness, we'd say, okay, let's cut some limbs and let's put them up over us tonight so it'll kind of keep the rain off or the sun out. And so we would live in what's called these booths there. All right? What they did is that they went out and they got these things, and they'd go up on the housetop and they'd make them a little encampment up there, like our kids do today. Go out in the backyard and set up a tent, you know, and they're going to go camping. So they set up these booths on top of their houses and in their yards and in the temple grounds and everywhere. And everybody moved out of the house and lived in a booth for 1 week. Every year you're supposed to do that. They didn't know that. They hadn't been doing that. Now then they're going to do that. Why did God tell them to do it? He said, I want you to do it as a memorial. I want you to do it to remember something. What was it? Okay, when I brought you out of Egypt, you went around and you lived in booths for 40 years. And I took care of you. And I want you to be reminded of that every year. So they kept that Feast of Booths then. Now skip down to verse 18. Also day by day, from the first day unto the last day, he read in the book of the law of God. And they kept the feast 7 days, and on the 8th day was a solemn assembly according to the ordinance of the law. So they did exactly what God told them to do. Every day they read from that law, and now then they are a happy, contented group of people knowing what God would have them to do. Okay, in chapter 9, they now are going to do what any person would do when you find out that you have been so terribly, terribly wrong all your life. What would you do? If you guys, if you found out, and it just revealed to you, you found out tonight for the first time, that the things that you've been doing to your wife, which you thought were cute and nice and sweet, was totally wrong and hurt her feelings every time you did it. All those things that you think, whereby you think you're okay. And you find out that your whole life has been one of bringing sorrow to your wife. Well, you say, I'm going to quit. So you quit. But what else would you want to do? What? Apologize. That's how much apology? Okay, it depends on how sorry you really are, but that's what I mean. If your whole life was one like that, and you have a tender heart, you couldn't apologize enough, could you? There are some things that you might say something and you didn't know, and oh, I'm sorry, what I meant was this over here. And it's no big deal. But there are times when you can't apologize enough. Now, that's what these people are going to do. They just can't apologize enough. Daniel was that way. When Daniel found out, in Daniel chapter 9, he just went on and on and on. I couldn't apologize enough. Now, these people are going to apologize to God. They're going to pray to God. And so they start out. Now, on the 20th and 4th day of the month, the children of Israel were assembled fasting with sackcloth and earth upon them. What does that show you? If they have sackcloth and earth. Okay, they put on this old rough cloth, and then they throw dirt on their head, and this was the sign of mourning. This is what they would do when the nation was destroyed. When somebody died, it was a sign of great mourning. 2, and the seed of Israel separated themselves from all foreigners and stood and confessed their sins and the iniquities of their fathers. And they stood up in the place and read in the book of the law of Jehovah their God a fourth part of the day. And another fourth part they confessed and worshiped Jehovah their God. So for 3 hours they read the Bible. For 3 hours they prayed and confessed their sins day after day in doing this. All right, now, what they did, skip down to verse 6. They said, Thou art Jehovah, even thou alone. Thou hast made the heaven and heaven of heavens and the host and the earth and all that are therein, and the seas and all that in them is, and thou preservest them all, and the host of the heavens worship thee. So now then they are addressing God. You are the great God who made everything, and everything stands to worship you. 7. Thou art Jehovah, the God who didst choose Abraham, brought him forth out of the Ur of the Chaldees, and gave him the name of Abraham, and foundest his heart faithful before thee, and made a covenant with him to give the land of the Canaanites, Hittites, Amorites, Perizzites, Jebusites, Girgasites, to give it unto his seed, and hast performed thy words, for thou art righteous. And thou saw the affliction of our fathers in Egypt. And so you opened the Red Sea, and you brought them across the Red Sea that is in there. I want you to notice something when he brought them across the Red Sea. What else they say? In verse 10, and show us signs and wonders upon Pharaoh and all his servants, and on all the people of the land, for thou knewest that they dealt proudly against them, and didst get thee a name as it is this day. What was it that God did when he performed these 10 plagues on Pharaoh and all the people? He got him a name. What does that mean? A reputation. All the nations round about heard about this God that brought his people out of Egypt, out of the hands of the Pharaoh, and it made known what a powerful God it is. And in 9, he did all this. In 11, you divided the sea and so forth. And 13, you came down also upon Mount Sinai and spake with them from heaven, and gave us them righteous ordinance and true laws and good statutes and commandments, and made known to them thy holy Sabbath, and commandest them commandments and statutes and the law of Moses thy servant. In other words, what they're doing is they're just going through the history of the Jewish nation. You're the God who did all of this. See? You did the whole thing. Now to verse 16. But they and our fathers dealt proudly, and hardened their necks, and hearkened not to thy commandments, and refused to obey. Neither were mindful of thy wonders as thou didst among them, but hardened their necks, and in their rebellion appointed a captain to return to their bondage. You remember out there at the foot of Mount Sinai when Moses went up to get the Ten Commandments? He's up there for 30 days, and what did they do? Appointed a captain, see, and said, take us back in there. So we were rebellious. Yea, when they had made them a molten calf, and they said, this is the God that brought us out of Egypt. So now then, they're confessing their sins. What they're doing is they're comparing God's faithfulness with their unfaithfulness. See? Telling what God did, what wonderful things you did, and then here's what we did. And then here's the wonderful thing you did, and then here's what we did. Look at verse 17. But thou art a God ready to pardon, gracious and merciful, slow to anger, and abundant in loving kindness, and forsookest them not. So that's the kind of God you are. An all-powerful, ever-loving God that takes care of us. And we're the kind of people that rebels against you. And you're the kind of God that will forgive us. We're the kind of people that will keep rebelling. And you're the kind of God that is long-suffering. And so what they're trying to do is to confess to God how wonderful He is and how they have failed Him. So they go on and down there. And I'm kind of in a hurry here because I want to finish Nehemiah. But they give the history of the Jewish people and what they did and how they came into Canaan. And God gave them the land of Canaan and so forth. And in 25, you did eat and you were filled and you became fat. You delighted yourself with great goodness. In other words, when you came into the land of Canaan, all you had to do was just come in and take it over. Walk in and take over the land of Canaan. What kind of land was the land of Canaan? Very prosperous land. You just moved into their farms. You moved into their homes. You moved in. You ate from their vineyards. And it was God who gave all that to you. 26, nevertheless, they were disobedient and rebelled against thee, and cast thy law behind their back, and slew thy prophets that testified against them to turn them again unto great provocation. Therefore you delivered them. Now then he said, that's the reason you delivered them into captivity. Now then you brought us back out in there. Skip down to verse 31. Nevertheless, in thy manifest mercies, thou did not make a full end of them, nor forsake them, for thou art a gracious and merciful God. So you're a wonderful God. You didn't just annihilate your people in there, but you brought us back out. 32. Now therefore, our God, the great and mighty and terrible God, who keepeth covenant and loving kindness, let not all the travail seem little before thee that have come upon us, on our kings and princes, on our priests and prophets and so forth, from Assyria. Please, as you look down, we have gone through many years of tribulation. Don't let that look like a little thing in your eyes. In other words, don't consider it little. That was a horrible thing that we went through, and we pray that you will recognize that and help us in in living it out on this side. All right, he goes on then, 36. Behold, we are servants this day, and as for the land that thou givest unto our fathers to eat the fruit thereof and the good thereof, behold, we are servants in it, and it yieldeth much increase unto the kings whom thou hast set over us because of our sins. Who would the kings be that God set over them because of their sins? Assyria and Babylon. See? Yeah, so we're servants of them. They also have power over our bodies, over our cattle and our pleasure, and we are in great distress. So we're still in there. And yet for all this, we make a sure covenant and write it, and our princes, our Levites, and our priests seal unto it. So we're making a covenant with you now. God will not do that again. We will be faithful to you. As you go back over the history of the Jews, how many times has the Jews rebelled against God? God brought a problem upon them. Then they said, oh, God, take us back. God took them back. And then they went back again. How many times that happened? Well, here again, they're saying, we'll be faithful. Now then, it goes on down. It gives a list of names of people that signed this. And we'll not look at the names down there. But what they say is that we're going to do this, and down in verse 29 there, they clave to their brethren, their nobles, and so forth, and unto an oath to walk in Moses' law, God's law, which was given by Moses, the servant of God, and to observe to do all the commandments of Jehovah our God, his ordinance, his statutes, and that we would not give our daughters unto the people of the land, nor take their daughters to our sons. Now, we're making that covenant with you. See, that we're not going to do all of that. In chapter, what do I want to hit in here? I don't want to miss anything, but my time's going to run out on me. So you see in 32, and it goes on down, they say that what we will do is the sin offerings and the first fruits and all of these things we are going to do, is what they promise in all of this. In chapter 11, you again have a bunch of genealogies of all these people that are faithful and are going to do what God promised to do, what God says. Skip down to verse 27. They've made the covenant, they've signed and sealed the covenant, and said, at the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, they sought the Levites out of their places to bring them to Jerusalem to keep the dedication with gladness, both with thanksgiving and with singing, with cymbals, psalteries, and with harps. Now, they're going to have the dedication of the wall. They're going to have a ceremony to dedicate that the wall itself now has become complete. So they did this. And then you have a bunch of names of some other people that did certain things. That's there. Let's see here. I'm trying to scan to see. Verse 45, and they kept the charge of their God and the charge of purification of the singing. And in other words, they're doing everything that God told them to do. Now, chapter 13. On that day, they read in the book of Moses in the audience of the people, and therein was found written that an Ammonite and a Moabite should not enter into the assembly of God forever, because they meant not the children of Israel with bread and water, but hired Balaam against them to curse them. Now, if you remember back when they were going through the wilderness, and the Moabites and Ammonites hired Balaam to go down and curse them, God turned the cursing into a blessing. But when they got through, God said, now, because that's how they treated you, the Moabites and the Ammonites, never again will a Moabite or an Ammonite be allowed in the temple of God. See, they're not going to be allowed in there. All right. The sad thing is they found some in there. Now in verse 4. Now before this, Eliashib. This is a priest. The priest there was appointed over the chambers of the house of our God, that'd be the temple, being allied unto Tobiah. Remember that guy? Tobiah? He's one of those guys that made fun of Nehemiah. If a little fox jumps up on the wall, it'll break it down. Now the priest is allied with Tobiah. So the enemies are getting in, making friends of the priest that is in there. And he had prepared for Tobiah a great chamber. That is a big room where Tobiah could live right there in the temple. And they offered offerings that is there with Tobiah. Now, in verse 6, Nehemiah lets you know how that happened. But in all this time I was not in Jerusalem, for in the 32nd year of Artaxerxes, king of Babylon, I went unto the king, and after certain days asked I leave of the king, and I came to Jerusalem. So Nehemiah had to go back to report in to the king. While he was back there, the priest and Tobiah got together, and the priest moved Tobiah into the temple. See, that evil man into the temple. Now, when Nehemiah gets back, he finds out about it. 7. And I came to Jerusalem and understood the evil that Eliashib had done to Tobiah in preparing him a chamber or a room in the courts of the house of God. And it grieved me sore. Therefore I cast forth all the household stuff of Tobiah out of the chamber. Then I commanded, and they cleansed the chambers, and thither brought I again the vessels of the house of God with the meal offerings and the frankincense. So I threw out all the furniture, everything that Tobiah had in there. I ran him out of the temple and got him away. Remember, this is the guy that tried to get Nehemiah to compromise. Nehemiah would say, I'm not even going to come down and talk with you. Well, while Nehemiah was gone, he wiggled his way right in. Now, verse 10, here's another problem. By the way, if we look right here at our next chart on here, we can see here that the tactics of the enemy here, here they ought to come up. Of these various ones, we looked at this last week when we looked at what the enemy did. They mocked and made fun. They caused confusion. The brethren came in. They gave up. They caused them to prepare for war. They had greed among themselves and charged interest. They offered to negotiate, come out and negotiate, and he said no. They lied and threatened government intervention. They tempted him to sin. And now then, we're down chapter 13. Down in chapter 13, 1 through 9, the enemy got into the house of God. And so Nehemiah kicked them out. Now then, the next thing is, they quit tithing to the priest. In verse 10, and I perceived that the portion of the Levites had not been given them, so the Levites and the singers that did the work were fled every one to his field. He had to go out and make a living on his own. Then contended I with the rulers and said, why is the house of God forsaken? Now the house of God would be the temple. Who would be the ones keeping the temple? The Levites. They're not there. Why is the house of God forsaken? It's because you're not doing what Moses told you to do. You're to give your tithe. And that is to be what the priests get in order to keep their work and uphold their families and so forth while they're doing this temple. So he reinstated that tithe. Said, we're going to keep that tithe. Now then, in verse 15, then he noticed that they were violating the Sabbath day. In those days saw I in Judah some men treading wine presses on the Sabbath, and bringing in sheaves, that is, bringing in hay out of the field, and lading asses therewith, loading them up, as also wine, grapes, figs, and all manner of burdens, which they brought into Jerusalem on the Sabbath day. So they're now carrying on their customary work on the Sabbath day. And I testified against them in the day wherein they sold victuals. There dwelt men of Tyre also there, who brought in fish and all manner of wares, and sold on the Sabbath unto the children of Judah and in Jerusalem. Then I contended with the nobles of Judah, and said unto them, what evil thing is this that you do and profane the Sabbath day? Did not your fathers thus, and did not our God bring all this evil upon us and upon this city? Yet ye bring more wrath upon Israel by profaning the Sabbath. By the way, what had they just done just not too long ago? They had made a covenant with God, taken an oath. And now then, they're even out carrying on activities on the Sabbath day. Look what he did. Verse 19. And it came to pass that when the gates of Jerusalem began to be dark before the Sabbath, I commanded that the doors should be shut. Now the Sabbath would start at what time of the day? At sundown. At sundown. And so it'd be about 6 o'clock in the evening. Now he said, just right here when the sun started to go down, I commanded those doors to be shut so that nobody can get in and out of Jerusalem to bring their wares in to sell. And commanded that they should not be opened till after the Sabbath. So keep those doors shut. And some of my servants set I over the gates, that there should no burden be brought in on the Sabbath day. So I locked the gates. I put some of my servants up there to make sure that nobody goes in and out bringing things to buy and sell on the Sabbath day. So the merchants and the sellers of all kind of wares lodged without Jerusalem once or twice. So people would come in. They've been used now to coming in on the Sabbath day, bringing in all their wares and selling them. They come in this time and they find the gates locked. So they sat down outside the gates. And they're waiting out there, so as soon as the gates are opened, bing, they can get in. The thing that they're wanting is to get in and start making money. All right, he said, now they came in, they did this once or twice. 21, this is kind of funny. Then I testified against them and said unto them, why lodge you about the wall? If you do so again, I will lay hands on you. Now, in English, that doesn't sound too bad. It kind of sound like Quaker talking. But what did he really say in our language? If you do this again, I'm coming over this wall after you, buddy. I'm going to get you. There's going to be a fight. I'm going to lay hands on you. And so you guys get out of here. In other words, this is tough talk. You find these guys, as they were dealing with sinners here, that they dealt in a very tough way and very harsh way, kicking people out and running these people off. And he said, and from that time forth came no more on the Sabbath day. So he scared them. They said, we'll stay away from that place. And I commanded the Levites that they should purify themselves. They should come and keep the gate and sanctify the Sabbath. He said, remember unto me, O my God, this also, and spare me according to the greatness of thy loving kindness. So remember this as a good work. Now in those days also saw I the Jews that had married women of Ashdod and Ammon and of Moab. And their children spake half in the speech of Ashdod, and could not speak in the Jews' language, but according to the language of each people. So now then, they had gone over and outside the land of Canaan, and they had married over here these Moabites and Ammonites. What is it that a Moabite and Ammonite can't do? Can't come into the temple. They're cut out of that. But now then you're out marrying these people, and the children grow up, and they speak half in the language of the Jews and half in the language of Ashdod. They speak both languages. What would you think today if, let's take a Christian marries somebody who's not a Christian. They marry a Mohammedan or something, Muslim, and the children grow up. Dad teaches them to be a Christian. Mom teaches them to be a Muslim. And when the kids grow up, how are they going to talk? They'll talk like Dad. They'll talk like Mom. They'll say some things right, like Dad. Then they'll say things wrong, like Mom, because they're going to be taught both of them. And so, what he says is, he condemns it. He said, and I contended with them and cursed them and smote certain of them and plucked off their hair and made them swear by God, saying, hey, how would you like that? Sometimes you remember I try to get Steve to be rough with you. I say, Steve, tell him, do this, put up the songbooks. And Steve's so nice, please put up your songbooks. Steve, tell him to put up the songbooks. Hey, you think that's tough. Well, the next time, Steve, I want you to jump down, and somebody that doesn't put up a songbook, I want you to smite them and then pluck off their hair. Okay? Then I'll be satisfied. Okay. So that's what he did. And he said, you shall not give your daughters unto their sons, nor take their daughters for your sons, or for yourself. Did not Solomon, king of Israel, sin by these things? And then he said, no king was smarter than he was, and yet he sinned by them. then we hearken unto you and all this great evil to trespass against our God and marrying foreign women. So stop that. Quit that. Now, what is it that Ezra had found a few years before? They'd done that. And they'd married the Canaanite women, and he made them put them away because that was a specific law against that God had given. You cannot marry those women. 28. And one of the sons of Joiada, the son of Eliashib, the high priest, was son-in-law to Sanballat. You remember him? Tobiah and Sanballat? Tobiah had got him a room up there in the temple. And now then, one of the sons of the priest is a son-in-law to Sanballat. Married within them. So he said, therefore I chased them from me. I just chased these people out. Remember them, O my God, because they have defiled the priesthood and the covenant and the priest of the Levites. Then cleansed I them from all foreigners and appointed charges for the priest, and so forth. He said, remember me for all the good that I have done. Okay, so there we find all those ways then that the enemy tried gone. And the following Wednesday then, we will study the book of Malachi then on him. Okay,